I welcome everybody. I am excited to be joined today by Joan Hatem-Roy, who is the Chief Executive Officer for Elder Services of the Merrimack Valley and North Shore in Massachusetts. Thank you, Joan, for joining. I appreciate you being part of the discussion today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, well, so much has happened in the past, just this year alone. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about Elder Services and kind of what's been happening in relationship to the current environment.
So I think there's a lot to tell. It's interesting that, as most people know, or we recently underwent a merger. We're with North Shore Elder Services. So we're going to be coming up on our anniversary on July 1st. So it's exciting. So before all the pandemic hit, we were looking at both operations and integrating both operations. One of the things that the pandemic did for us is it put everything on fast forward, and we were able to do a lot of the integrations much quicker. So interestingly enough, we were able to be remote, 100% remote, our staff in both locations by mid-March. So that did help us to be able to be prepared. So all of our staff were remote. We were able to get people access to all the technology that they needed to be able to do their jobs from home. So that was a real benefit for us to be able to do that. One of the things that we had to do early on is relook at how we offer services. All of our services are in-home services. So it took a lot of working with our provider network, our homemaking agencies, our own staff to figure out, how do you do this virtually? How do you do this in an environment where you can't be face-to-face? And some of the programs in particular that are difficult, like our protective service, where we're going in to intervene on elder abuse situations. I have to say that the state has been, the Executive Office of Elder Affairs and their staff have been phenomenal in working with us in trying to transition our models to be able to get the services accomplished and needed and in the home, but in a much different way. The biggest impact that we saw early on was the need for food insecurity. We serve on a daily basis across the 28 cities and towns over 32, I think we might be up to 34, maybe 100 in-home Meals on Wheels, home delivered meals a day.
Wow.
So we did not want that service to stop. And that was a critical, because not only is it food, but it is that daily check-in. It helps with social isolation. It helps with a number of things. So immediately we were able to transition that program that, our drivers had masks, they had gloves, that they worked around making sure that, the meal was left on the front porch or hung on the door, or a number of different ways that they socially distanced and made sure that everything was taken care of. So we continue to offer that. One of the biggest impacts on the meals is that our senior centers and the Council on Aging are a big partner of offering congregate meals and meals at the Councils on Aging. So we were able to transition those into grab and go so that people still got the food that they need. We saw over a 30% increase in the requests for meals right within the first 2 to 3 weeks.
That's
and I'm really excited to say our kitchen, our caterer, our staff, everybody was able to accommodate that increase. And we're continuing, the increase is sort of stable off, but now we have that need for grocery shopping. So we were able to transition some of our services into actual grocery shopping and delivery for individuals. So the transition for our community programs, working with the state, working with our partners, working with our staff to make sure services still went into the home. So that was the major impact. As you can imagine, many of the seniors were afraid to let people into their homes now, right?
Of course.
We're all, you can really understand
They're the most
that.
vulnerable population.
Right, and they really wanted to, said, okay, listen, my daughter will do it for now, or even the families were saying, we don't want anybody in the home. So our services have decreased in that perspective, that they've been on suspend until people feel more comfortable. But it's starting to pick up now. It's starting to, people are starting to let people in now that we have all the protocols in place and the safety protocols. So that's been the biggest challenge, is making that quick change.
Yeah. How have you seen, so with a 30% increase and with a shift to technology services or remote services. How have you guys been looking at internally the use of technology, either now or going forward?
Well, one of the things that I think in the, if we were fast forwarding and thinking, it had, I think there's this digital divide, with seniors and young people. We have programs, as you know, that range anywhere from 3 to 103, right? And, obviously the younger population is used to texting and having that
Yep.
communication. Had we, had foresight to know that many of our consumers, especially those high-risk consumers, don't either have the technology in their home, don't have cell phones, but more importantly, can't afford the internet costs or the Wi-Fi costs. Going forward, I think that's a critical way for us to meet some of the issues. Those that had either family members who set them up with laptops, or they had the laptops, or maybe some of the younger old people that had, already had some of these technologies, we were able to decrease their isolation. They were able to do telehealth visits with their physicians. We're able to do daily face-to-face check-ins with folks. Those that don't have it, that divide, that digital divide, are at a much more disadvantage. So going forward, this has been a priority of us. We've already started to look at funding. We've had conversations with Comcast that offers a discounted rate of Comcast Essentials for folks. So in the next 6 months, I think you'll see a big difference. I have a lot of people that say, well, elders won't learn how to text, so they don't want to learn technology. And I don't really believe that's true. I think some of the technology is simple enough that it doesn't have to be the crazy iPhones that we all have or our kids have that do a number of things. It has to do some of the critical basic things. But we are at a disadvantage now because we can't send somebody into the home to actually train them and set them up. Although you could still do that remotely. It's a double whammy if somebody's never used technology before.
Right. It's a little more
but
difficult.
I do think that's one of our lessons learned going forward, that we could have really addressed some of these issues much better than just telephone. We did it telephonically, obviously, but that face-to-face contact, especially with some of our isolated seniors, would have been really critical.
Yeah. And so when you look forward and you've got this technology and you guys are undergoing massive amount of change in a shorter period of time, let's talk just real quick a little bit about the future. When you look forward to the opportunities that are being created out of this, or where things are heading, what do you see as some of those big category opportunities for elder service organizations?
Well, unfortunately, as everybody knows, the long-term care facilities were horrifically hit with the number of deaths that happened. And what's that, I think, and I see in the future, that's going to create much more resistance for people who are going to want to go into those facilities, even if they really truly need it. Sometimes, one of our programs is called long-term care options. We go into if somebody's already in a nursing home, we sit down with the individual, we work with the staff and say, these are your options if you choose to come home. And we continue that service throughout this pandemic and trying to get those people who had some capacity to be able to go home, that still had a home to go to, that still maybe wanted to go home and live with a family. Because people are now really afraid to be in these facilities, although
Sure.
they've made major, as the whole system has major changes to make sure that people stay safe. But if you look at the number of people that died from the, I think it's somewhere 4,700 people that died in long-term care facilities, as opposed to the numbers, I just got the numbers for the state of Massachusetts, that those in our programs only, right, in our home care program that serve older adult, it's age, need, and income eligible, so it's low income, elderly,
Yeah.
most of the frail. There were around 300 deaths in the same time frame.
Wow.
So those numbers are staggering difference, and I think people are going to be afraid to go into it. So we're looking at our own services. We've always believed that people should have choice, that they should be able to live in their home with services if they're able to do that. I see that we're going to have an increase of that and people wanting to stay in the community even longer, and therefore a need for our services to be enhanced, to be quick, to be responsive, and to be patient-centered and consumer-centered.
Yes. Do you think that's driving more of that in-home supports because people are going to kind of stay where they are, and maybe think twice about considering, that congregate care?
I do. Before this happened, we were struggling with the workforce issue. It is and I've listened to some of your other interviews with CEOs that have the commitment of the staff who want to go into these homes, want to go care for these individuals. It's those folks that have that passion
It's amazing.
to do this work. And it's like they are the heroes in this whole craziness. They are the heroes that they wanted to continue to do that. With that said, there is a workforce shortage, and there was a workforce shortage going into this. So we had already begun on the statewide network, looking at how do we make that job, more people wanting to go into it, getting individuals sooner, like maybe through the trade schools, making it to have a career ladder so that there was professional growth in these positions, and really professionalizing it so that people want to come into that field. So if we're going to see this growth, if we're going to see more people needing these services, if we're going to be keeping more frail individuals in the home with the services, and we can do that, we're going to need that workforce. So that is going to be one of the challenges if we see a shift going forward.
Yeah, no, that's a pretty significant gap to be able to fill. On the remote work. What else in terms of future opportunities do you see? Like where's the human services market going now, or where's the elder service care organizations going? What does the future look like? And I know that's kind of crystal ball, but what organizations need to be focused on?
Well, we've already started, as you know, our post-pandemic strategic planning, starting to talk to external stakeholders to think about what would our services need to look like, 6 months from now, a
Sure.
year from now. And there's a lot of opportunities. As I said, certainly the technology is one perspective. The ability for our system to completely go remote in that quick of a time is significant. It's going to change how we do things. I think we've seen some efficiencies from this. It's difficult to measure it right now because it's hard for our workers. Even myself, I have to lock myself in the room because if the garbage men come, my dogs are going to go crazy. And
yes. It's the background noises when you're on Zoom calls that kill you.
Yes, they kill you, right? And I feel for my staff, and especially my kids are older, but if you've got small kids at home, I just can't imagine that work-life balance. So thinking about working for remote is really good. Hopefully our life gets back to normal, so the kids are back at school and their daycares and all those things. But that's going to significantly impact what we need and how we deliver the care that we deliver it.
Yeah.
The fact that we can do it remotely, the fact that we've been able to learn about new partnerships. So we've always had great collaboration with our partnerships, but even more so because it really proved that we needed everybody to do this work. Our councils on aging and senior centers have been phenomenal because they're at the grassroots and they know the person who lives on Main Street and needs certain particular things that may not already be in our system. So I think the collaboration is going to be critical. I think it's looking at that remote and how do we enhance what we're currently doing, and then what new services can we offer. As you know, we have our Healthy Living Center of Excellence, which provides 14 to 15 different evidence-based wellness programs, from falls prevention to depression management to chronic disease management. All of those programs were typically in group settings, and that group setting is really what made those programs work. Well, guess what? We can't do group settings right now, right? So they've been able to mobilize those programs virtually through technology, but we're also going to be spearheading an initiative where those programs become one-on-one as opposed to a group setting. So every one of our services, really, we have to look at and think about how do we deliver them differently. The final thing I'll say to that is the value, the value proposition on our Meals on Wheels program has always been, before the pandemic was really questionable. It's an old model, Meals on Wheels, right? But I think the health system and the big network may not understand the value of that meal that is delivered. It's more than a meal. It's you're seeing the person, you're checking in on the person. If Mrs. Jones doesn't come to the door, you're calling, you've got a protocol, emergency protocol. So the value of that one meal has been, I think, validated right now. And so the the food insecurity issues are huge. And that's going to be another opportunity of how we can look at delivery. There's a number of, I would call them competitors out there around food.
That word's going to get thrown around more and more in the nonprofit space, trust me.
Yes, right. So competitors who can do it cheaper and easier, and they deliver them at the doorstep, and you get 10 meals for, the week. And that's, it's maybe a cheaper and more efficient model, but it's not meeting that really critical need for the people that we serve.
Do some of those companies create like partnership opportunities or potential partnership opportunities? Because, maybe they have a technology network that's organizing logistics or things like that. Like what?
So we have had conversations with a few of them. They are part of a bigger network. We're on a lot of the food insecurity committees, community servings, mom's meals, all of those. So we are having conversations with them. Certainly we don't see, I do think we're stronger together than apart. And they do have things that we can't do right now. We were in the process of investing in a technology as well for our meals drivers. These meals drivers are another of those unsung heroes. On the Lawrence side, they're volunteers. Many of them are seniors themselves. A lot of them took a step back during the height of the COVID because they were at risk themselves.
Yeah, sure.
We had over 90 volunteers step up to the plate, whether they were students or restaurant workers or different people who were out of work that wanted to step in. But they love that job. Like I say, when I retire, I'm going to be a meals driver, because it's that you get that much. I'm not retiring anytime soon, but you get such. It's a rewarding experience to be able to do that. And you see the senior will be standing there with their fork and knife waiting. It's like, you're 5 minutes late. Where's my food? So, I do think there's going to be a lot of new opportunities for partnerships and things coming from that.
Yeah, so you guys just recently merged with North Shore Elder Services. What was that whole partnership experience like, and coming together like?
So, as I said, we're coming up on the year, and as you know, and you told us many times, through mergers, it's very difficult. And what we learned is the part of the mergers that you think are going to be hard, like the administrative integrations and the finances and all of those things. That those things would be simple. The hard stuff is the people stuff. It's really hard. It's difficult for change, especially when one organization is coming in and it seems like they're taking over. So we've been working through some of those challenges. What the pandemic did show us is that I think staff felt they could trust us. That one of my first things out of the gate when this happened was obviously our consumers being safe and healthy, but our staff. So we did whatever we could to make sure they stayed whole. That was my message. We need to keep staff whole. We need to keep them working, because when this turns around, they need to get back to work. And so keeping staff whole, giving them the tools they need to continue to do their job, taking those positions that may have been more difficult to do from home because they were much more office focused, right, to give those employees something that had value for them to do. We weren't just wanting to pay people for sitting at home and doing nothing. So those positions that were different, we had them either do professional development activities or help with different, that maybe it was calling consumers. So we wanted to make sure that everybody stayed whole. And that, I believe, gave us some credibility where we may have been lacking credibility through the interim merger part. The fact that we were committed to our staff, the fact that we were able to turn the Danvers site remote within 3 days. I give our IT team credit. We had already been remote in the Lawrence side. Our plan was 6 months to get Danvers to remote. We were fortunate we didn't have bad snowstorms this winter, so we didn't have as many challenges about people having to work remotely. So we were able to do that, and fortunately we were able to give them the laptops and the technology and the things that we needed to give them to be able to do that. So all of those different pieces, we may have been on a little bit rocky road for a little while. I believe and I hope and I've heard from staff that they know that we're committed to them and we value them as much as we value the Lawrence staff. So I hope that it has helped us turn the corner a little bit.
That's great. That's great. Now I know there's a lot of organizations, small, medium, and large, talking about partnerships and mergers, affiliations, or whatever. And one of the questions that they have is just, how do I get started? Right? Like, how does a CEO go talk to another CEO? Because you guys kind of fell into this opportunity. Maybe just any advice to other CEOs on like how to approach somebody else?
We have a network of 26, well now it's 25, and there have been leadership
Elder service
changes.
organizations?
Yeah, the Aging Service Access Points. So that's a designation by the state, and there's 26 now, there's 25. And so when there has been a leadership change, and recently there was some, nearby, I had encouraged some of the CEOs to have those conversations, to just talk about it. I don't see yet that it's, I think it's a difficult conversation. There's a lot to feel like you're giving up if you're the organization that may be acquired. So I have been very vocal about it isn't so bad, but I also realized that we were the surviving organization, so that's a different lens. And interestingly enough, one of our colleagues, Brad Howell and I were going to speak at the National Aging Conference together around the benefits of mergers. Now, of course, it got canceled, but the more we start talking about it, and really there's so many lessons learned. I think if I look back 6 months ago, all the different things that we did really good and all the things that we did not so good, it's something that I do think other CEOs need to hear. But it shouldn't be a bad word. It shouldn't be a bad word, especially when you see things like this happening. And how quickly were you able to mobilize, get on your feet, not get on your feet, and where were your biggest pain points? And would that have been the same if you were part of another network or a larger network?
Yeah, we talk about diversification of revenue streams and things like that, just to be a little bit, it's like any investment portfolio. You're right. You want diversification. It's kind of the same thing in human services. You kind of, especially now going into the future, it's diversification is just that is so important.
Right.
Any big leadership lessons that you took away from either the merger or took away from kind of the past 3 months of of chaos?
Well, I do think it's really time for reflection. If I would just suggest that any of us that to look back and for us, the timeline was that March 13th, 16th, when the governor came out and said, we're remote and things.
March 13th, which was Friday the 13th, right?
It was Friday the 13th. So we were
terrible.
So it was, so we had, and so March 16th was the Monday. And so we totally had everybody working from home. I think if you, as I've done with my team and sort of a lessons learned is to look back on your organization of that week and say, what were you able to do easily? What weren't you able to do easily? And where was your biggest struggles? And then I would look at those to say, okay, how do we address those? Because one of the things that we were fortunate in that we were already remote, which was good. We lived through the gas crisis. You got to remember, right? We were the center of the gas crisis. We, years ago, a lot of people won't remember, had floods where our whole office got flooded. So we've lived through a lot of traumatic events that prepared us for what this was. The other thing, and it's not easy when you're state funded and you were just mentioning diversification, but having financial stability is really important, because if you go into something like this and you're already, bare bones, that's going to make things much more difficult. So
yeah.
it's really taking, I think, looking back and saying, okay, what did we do really well and easily, and what couldn't we do? And how do we make sure that we can in the future?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I appreciate that. I always like to end the interviews on, or the discussions on a positive note. Well, one of those bright spots. Anything from the past few months stand out to you, just to point out as a really great bright spot,
Yeah.
with your organization?
So the good news stories from our consumers have been like so heartwarming. Those are the things you thrive on, right? Yeah, the idea that people helped people, even if they had to help, neighbors, family members who may not have seen their senior for a while, were coming back to making sure that they came and took care of them. Grandchildren for grandparents that are neat, that it seemed like, we built a cocoon around some of these individuals and people came forward to help. So there's always those bright stars in some of these pandemics when you hear the good news stories. I think the other thing is that we learned a lot of efficiencies and and how to work remotely, so that and our staff have that trust in us. And I do believe they know that we are doing everything we can to try to support them, create a flexible work environment, and allow them to be able to be there for their families, their kids, and through this pandemic, but also be a really productive worker. So all of those things came out of this that I feel were really positives. So
Yeah.
you always have to try to find the light at, the light at the end of the tunnel. And I think we're starting to see some of those.
Yeah, it's amazing to hear some of the staffing stories. So,
Yeah,
thank you for sharing that, and I appreciate you being part of the discussion today. So, thank you very much.
absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right, so we thank you for watching. If you want to learn more about Joan and Elder Services of Merrimack Valley and North Shore, please click the link below. And as always, subscribe so that you can hear other videos by great leaders similar to Joan. Thank you.